This is an open hearing of the independent inquiry into matters relating to Afghanistan. Please ensure that all mobile phones and other personal electronic devices are either switched off or in silent mode. Please may I also draw your attention to the fact that the chair of the inquiry, the Right Honourable Lord Justice Haddon-Cave, has made a restriction order dated 22nd of January 2025 in relation to the conduct of those who are attending the hearing. The full order is displayed on the inquiry website and on the door of this court and of the media annex, but I will summarise its purpose. The first part of the order, which applies to this and to all future hearings of the inquiry, prohibits any person from making an audio or video recording of inquiry proceedings from within the hearing rooms without the express permission of the chair. Furthermore, no person may take a photograph in any room in which inquiry proceedings are taking place and at a time the inquiry is sitting without the express permission of the chair. For the avoidance of doubt, both of these prohibitions extend to the hearing in the media annex. The second part of the order, which applies to this hearing, arises as the live stream of these inquiry proceedings via YouTube will purposely be subject to a 10-minute delay. Where those who have supplied evidence to the inquiry have applied to restrict information from publication outside of the inquiry, in some instances the chair has made restriction orders, the effect of which is to protect that information. For the avoidance of doubt, where material or identities in documents shown on screen or subsequently published have been redacted, with or without an overwritten gist, the redacted material is restricted, and it is a breach of the restriction order to disclose what is thought to have been redacted. A restriction order prohibits the use, publication or dissemination of the information that it covers. In the event that something is said during the course of this hearing which may breach a restriction order made by the chair, the evidence may be halted and the hearing room and annex may be cleared for closed legal submissions as to whether any restriction order has been breached. And the live stream YouTube recording will be temporarily stopped for this period. Counsel to the inquiry or solicitor to the inquiry must be informed of any request to make an application for a restriction order in relation to anything that has been said or done in the inquiry hearing room in the preceding 10 minutes. If an application is made for a restriction order in relation to anything that has been said or done in the inquiry hearing room in the preceding 10 minutes, anything that was said or done during that period is subject to a restriction order, prohibiting its disclosure, repetition or duplication, until the chair has finally determined the application. Every restriction order is subject to a penal notice. This means that any breach of any element of the restriction orders may be certified to the High Court or the Court of Session, who will have the power to fine or imprison anyone found to have been in breach of the order. Court rise.
Good morning, Mr. Pughsley. Mr. Glasgow.
Please, you, sir. Would you like Mr. Pughsley to be re-sworn, or are you content he's still under oath?
I'm content.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Pughsley, yesterday afternoon we reached a stage where we have been discussing, with your help, some of the decisions that have been taken as regards possible lines of inquiry. We'd identified the information that had been provided by N1466. We'd identified the revelation of the contents of compartment A and the arguably contemporaneous record that was contained within it. And we'd also touched upon decisions to designate individuals as suspects and we'd had your help as to whether any of the decisions around those actions were or were not reasonable, and you'd identify courses of action that you might have taken and compare those to the decisions that were taken.
That's correct, yes.
Of course, one of the things that we need to bear in mind when we come to this point in the chronology, as you told us at the outset, was that there were changes to key personnel. And we might need to have your help, if we can please, on the impact in terms of the investigative strategy that those changes had. Because we left a position yesterday afternoon taking us up to about 2016. And the first key personnel change that you told us of yesterday was the replacement of Brigadier Warren as the PMA by Brigadier Neil. And that was in July of 2016, if I've got that right.
That's my recollection, yes.
In case it helps, can I take you, please, in your report to paragraph 179 on our page 39?
Thank you.
When you'd first identified the changes in key personnel, you had posed questions that might need to be asked of individuals in due course as to why changes had happened and why key roles had been changed quite close to each other. We know from what you had told us that changes to the PMA first in July 2016 and then to the Gold Commander in September of that same year, and then subsequently a change to the SIO.
That's correct, Chair, yes.
If we look to your paragraph 179, just to ensure that we have the relevant information available to us, you'd identified there from the documents provided to you that following the change in PMA, the change in the Gold Commander was as a result of the ill health of Colonel McAllister, replaced by Colonel Harvey.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
So it may well be that the close change in two key roles was due to external factors that the RMP had no control over.
One of the roles, possibly.
And obviously, if there had been an anticipated change in PMA, would you have expected there to be planning to deal with that change in role and an effective handover? So amongst all the things the PMA needed to consider, his mind would be focused on this operation as well.
Absolutely right, yes.
And if I recollect it correctly, one of the things that you had looked for in the document provided by the MOD was whether or not there were any handover or briefing notes that had been shared from one PMA to the other, and you were unable to find any.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
It may be, of course, that the two of them met and spoke on any number of occasions or over a period of hours in order to have a verbal briefing. But if that had happened, would you have expected to see a record somewhere, at least to identify it had taken place?
I would have expected a record, yes, but those meetings, of course, could have taken place.
And just when we think about the record that you would have expected to see, over and above identifying that they had met on a specific date or dates, would you have expected to see some sort of summary of the content of that handover so that anyone looking to review it could identify what had been said by one PMA to the next?
Absolutely right. Almost a briefing note, I guess, from Gold to the PMA to act as a full briefing document and note to the incoming PMA.
So if we think about it in investigative specific terms and focusing on Operation Northmoor, in order to assist Brigadier Neil as the incoming PA, you would have expected to find a document from the Gold Commander, who was Colonel McAllister at the time, a document from him providing a comprehensive briefing on Operation Northmoor that could be provided to the incoming PMA.
That's absolutely right. Identifying the activity taken, lines of inquiry, risks, concerns, whatever the issues, and we talked about many yesterday, should have been part of a full handover, documented, in my view, handover to the PMA.
And again, this may be an extremely obvious question to ask, but what is the significance in terms of Operation Northmoor of there being a document recording all of those details from the Gold Commander?
Well, a full document would hopefully ensure that no investigative strategy, no lines of inquiry, no risk, no barriers was missed in handover and therefore forgotten or simply just not dealt with. So it should deal with fully the assurance of the investigation will continue without anything being missed during a handover.
And if we're thinking about the continuation of the investigation, there are a number of possible lines of inquiry which have been identified in the last few months, a number of people with whom Operation Northmoor wants to speak. And you talked about the difference between the overt and the covert approaches that might be put into place. With the transition of one PMA to another, is there a hiatus when all these actions stop and wait for the new PMA to get up to speed and to approve them? Or should they continue in the background because it's part of an existing strategy?
They absolutely should continue, which is part of one of the reasons I said that changing key personnel at the same time is a risk. So with goals still in place, all of the strategic direction should have continued. The SIO is still in place. So therefore, all of his responsibility, Captain Wright, as the senior investigating officer, should continue unless there's a significant change in direction. Now at this time, of course, the direction from Gold being implemented by Captain Wright was both covert and there was some overt activity. So I think that activity could and should have carried on, not a pause, because for any period of time, really, shouldn't have been at the handover should have been before. It's now your responsibility to run this investigation or oversee the RMP element of this investigation.
Recognising that Operation Northmoor is one of the areas that the PMA has strategic guidance over, might there be a need for a little time for a new incoming PMA to get up to speed above and beyond the briefing given to him or her?
I don't think so. Not the role of PMA, if I understand it correctly. The PMA is the Chief Constable of the RMP. He, therefore, is running the RMP, not just this operation. Gold is running this operation, I guess, as the strategic, should be anyway, as the strategic lead. The SIO should be the senior and therefore the lead investigator. So the PMA should have, as I hopefully described yesterday, a much wider, broader position running the organisation that is the RMP.
So if we think about the arrival of the new PMA in July of 2016, at that stage, you still have Captain Wright as the SIO and Lieutenant Colonel McAllister as the Gold Commander.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
And assuming that Lieutenant Colonel McAllister was not unduly affected by his ill health over the course of the summer, it would mean that the two central key players for Operation Northmoor are the same that they have been for the last couple of years.
That's absolutely correct.
So when you talk about the investigative strategy remaining and continuing, do you have an eye to the fact that whilst the PMA might have changed, those who are effectively running and implementing investigative strategy for Northmoor are the same?
Absolutely right. The best example, if a Chief Constable changed in a Home Office force, I wouldn't expect any investigation to stop. Not one. The Chief Constable is not investigating. He is providing the top cover, the top support, the top resourcing to allow his staff or her staff to do their job.
I mean, just casting your mind back, if I may, to the time when you were with the Kent Police and you took over as the Chief Constable. At that stage, did you receive a proper briefing handover from your predecessor?
I was there. I was fortunate. I left the Metropolitan Police to go to Kent Police for 3 ranks. So to become the Chief Constable, I was the deputy before for about the best part 3.5 years. So I had a month or thereabouts proper handover with the Chief, who is currently in post, to pretty much get up to speed with everything the organisation was doing.
And as far as any live investigations into serious criminal offences that were current at that time, was there any pause to any of them?
No, the chief officers and or the Gold Commanders, if there were significant ones at that time, had been and briefed me before I took over the role of Chief Constable.
Can we just look to see what steps were taken by Brigadier Neil and what impact that might have had on the investigation when he took over as PMA. Can I take you, please, in the documents? Do you have available to you? It will be our third file. Can I take you, please, to tab 135? Tab 135 is a policy file report from Captain Wright, then SIO.
Thank you.
Recorded on the 24th of August of 2016, so a few weeks into Brigadier Neil's tenure as the PMA. And it records as follows. Following his appointment, PMA, that is Brigadier Neil, received a full brief on Team 1 inquiries in my absence, brackets on leave. Can we pause there for a moment? Clearly, according to this, Brigadier Neil did receive a full brief on the Team 1 activities for Operation Northmoor, but it appears that it took place after he had been appointed as PMA. Does that surprise you?
It does surprise me, but of course, I don't know what Brigadier Neil was doing before.
So if one's thinking in terms of best practice, would best practice have been, had he been available, for Brigadier Neil to have been briefed before he was appointed PMA?
Yes, it would, in my view.
In other words, giving him the opportunity to hit the ground running in terms of the wider strategic guidance he might give.
Yes.
Okay. The other thing to ask you is this, and again, it may be subject to the availability of Brigadier Neil or others, but the briefing provided to the new PMA in respect of Team 1 for Op Northmoor was done in the absence of the SIO. So that's without the lead investigator being present. Again, does that surprise you?
Yes, it does. Northmoor, as we know, had 3 SIOs, or 3, Team 1, 2 and 3. But for the SIO not to be available to brief the incoming PMA is surprising.
Have you seen any documents to suggest that Captain Wright drafted a briefing note to assist others in presenting the information to the PMA?
I've not seen such a document, Chair, no.
And we do know, of course, that Captain Wright had provided full briefings to external advisors on occasions, including the MERT teams and the NCA.
That's correct, yes.
So there were notes of briefings that he provided, and it may well be there was an internal document that he had available that he might have updated.
That would make sense.
But at present, not a document that you've been shown by anyone.
I haven't seen a briefing document that was used in the way that you've asked.
And it may well be, of course, that Captain Wright is in the best position to explain what happened, why it happened, and what, if anything, he did to ensure there was a proper briefing.
Of course, yes.
Can we then look to the next part of the decision that's recorded in the policy file? Brigadier Neil directed that no further action be taken in respect of the proposed covert activity on both suspects, in favour of him considering his options and taking advice from appropriate staff. As the recently arrived and incoming PMA, are you surprised that he has directed a pause on what is currently the proposed investigative strategy?
Well, the first thing I probably should say is the direction around the investigative strategy, in my view, at the strategic level is Gold's domain, and Gold should set the direction, whether that's covert or overt. So I would expect this firstly to have been a Gold decision rather than a PMA decision. But if you are coming in to an investigation which is a critical incident, a Category A investigation, and you want to feel assured about the lines going forward before you move forward, I can see why the PMA has made this decision. But as we see later, I think Brigadier Neil does quite a lot of Gold activity.
where you say that you think he does quite a lot of goal activity, but by that do you mean that he is descending into the realms of directing investigative strategy rather than having general oversight?
That's exactly what I mean, yes.
If one has a goal commander who is unwell and who might be leaving the team, might it be appropriate for the PMA to offer some sort of assistance to fill a gap if the goal commander can't be present?
Yes, for a short period of time, that would make sense.
Can we just look for the reasoning that's provided here? Because it may well be that the reason assists with understanding whether it was due to the ill health or something else. The reasons set out by Captain Wright for the decision taken by the PMA is as follows. Brigadier Neil has now been read in, as it must be, on Team 1 matters. He, by his own admission, is relatively inexperienced in deciding over RIPA-related applications and therefore wants to base his decisions on sound judgment. While this will cause further delay, it is both sensible and proportionate in my view.
And the reason that's important is a distinction here, of course, in role and rank. So goal commander within a murder investigation is normally an equivalent rank of superintendent, chief superintendent, and I think that's relevant from Lieutenant Colonel McAllister and Harvey. From a RIPA authority point of view, it's a higher authority. So if COVID surveillance or something similar was going to take place, many of those authorities would have to be given by the PMA.
If by his own admission he's inexperienced in making decisions over those applications, how best might he overcome that inexperience?
Well, I think there's two things, and again we mentioned them these yesterday. Number one is qualification, and I believe that Brigadier Neil had been on an authorising officer course before this, so therefore he was qualified. But if he had limited experience, it would be sensible to take advice from people who are experienced in that field.
And in terms of taking advice, as is recorded from appropriate staff, do you think that would be taking advice from people within the RMP or taking advice from people outside?
Well, both, I guess. I believe from Colonel Rochell, Brigadier Rochell, I beg your pardon, I believe when he's described the RMP, he has talked about they have experience in covert policing. I would expect, therefore, to be covert surveillance managers and such like within the establishment, lower rank than the Brigadier, to be fair, but they would be experienced in this expertise. So I think a little internal, but also there would be, again, through Home Office policing would probably be the best course of action, or indeed the Office of Surveillance Commissioners. So there are avenues to seek advice from.
And we'll come to it in due course, but as far as external advisors are concerned, did Brigadier Neil appoint external advisors to give him assistance in reaching decisions about the investigation?
Yes, he did. He appointed two specific advisors, Sir John Murphy, a retired Chief Constable, very experienced, and Mark Ellison, Casey, I think now, but then QC at the time.
And they were designated as the Independent Advisory Group, the IAG, who were to offer strategic advice to him.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
Can we just consider, having identified as part of the reasoning that Captain Wright regarded the delay to any applications for covert activity as both sensible and proportionate, could we just look at the next policy file entry, which we have at our divider 137, please?
Thank you.
About a fortnight later, on the 9th of September, we have a policy file report recorded by Captain Wright in which he identifies brief delivered to PMA, including all sensitive matters. He directed that I not submit any applications for covert activity until such times as he could appoint an advisor to such matters due to his own lack of experience in, it must be, that area. So it would seem that the decision being taken by Brigadier Neil is not simply to speak to people internally, other staff as have been recorded, but he's now looking for external advisors to support him in an area where he regards himself as inexperienced. Is that an appropriate step for the PMA to be taking?
I do think it's an appropriate step and a very sensible step.
So in terms of what was, at the time Brigadier Neil arrived in post, part of the investigative strategy, namely a look to see whether covert techniques might be deployed, there has been a pause to that part of the strategy. That appears to be because the PMA regards himself as lacking the appropriate experience, notwithstanding his qualifications, and that pause in this regard you consider to be appropriate for him to have taken.
I do.
Can we consider some of the other lines of inquiry that were being discussed by the investigators in the run-up to the appointment of Brigadier Neil? And to remind you that one of the issues that had caused concern within the RMP was securing the data from the UKSF and in particular getting access to the server known as ITS-1. Can I take you please to our divider 156? Still in the same file. And to identify the date and its relevance, the 15th of August of 2016, so again, not long after Brigadier Neil has arrived in post. And the decision here relates to data recovery. Following various delays in any agreements to recover the ITS-1 dataset, VTC held with a number of individuals in an effort to end the impasse. Following an explanation repeating the requirements to recover the ITS-1 system and the reasoning behind why RMP have not seized this to date, no firm agreement given. And there appears to be a preference to delay any decision pending technical and security advice. And if we look to the reason, Captain Wright's recorded this: further delay is now being encountered in respect of ITS-1 recovery. Gold has directed that we attempt to recover the data set amicably without the need at this stage to do so using our prerogative powers. That's, of course, a direction provided by Gold. But can I ask you this? In terms of a decision at this stage, now in August of 2016, to still use an amicable approach to recovery of what's considered a main line of investigation, is that an appropriate decision to have been taken?
It would depend what other avenues are required or needed by the SIO. So amicably, I assume, means that people, if you're supporting the investigation from within the military, you should be, with all the safeguards that we mentioned yesterday, you should be providing this data to assist the investigation. I assume that's going towards more a legal warrant style idea, that you are mandated then through a court direction to hand over or provide relevant information. That's what I'm assuming that is going. But again, my non-working in the military environment sort of pauses me to say any more than that, really.
Is this an issue that you would have thought the PMA might want to be engaged with?
I think this is one of the very strategic decisions at the very highest level that the PMA should be addressing. So as we said yesterday, Gold, in my view, could and should have done more with this. But if that was, again, coming up against whatever reason for non-production of the data, yes, it should be escalated to the PMA, and he should be having amicable conversations with those from DSF. And if, in due course, that had to become a legal route, then I'm sure the SPA and others would have directed on that.
If there had been an effective brief and or handover from PMA to PMA, and particularly a brief in which the SIO and Gold for Northmoor had input. Is the impasse about the recovery of the data set the sort of topic that should have been flagged in that handover?
100%. The three major issues that would have been and should have been flagged in that handover, one would have been the resourcing, and we've talked about that, both staff and location. Two would have been absolutely the acquisition of the independent data, again, and that is what we're talking about here. And number three, I think, would have been for me how quickly we could get to interview significant witnesses.
In the terms of, you've described it, of escalating the problem from SIO to Gold to PMA, is there a risk that if you don't involve the brigadier or someone of that rank, that you don't have someone sufficiently senior to enter negotiations with UKSF?
Yes, absolutely right. This is the highest rank within the RMP, if I understand it correctly. So it's the highest officer in the RMP raising significant concerns with counterparts elsewhere in the military.
And it may well be that those counterparts are senior in rank to that particular brigadier, but would it give evidence that the Chief Constable, in that sense the brigadier here, is in command of this issue and wants it resolved?
It would do that, and it would also highlight, wouldn't it, how important this is.
Can we look a little bit more at this issue for a moment, please? Can we turn on, if you wouldn't mind, to divider 158? I'm so sorry, 159. I apologise, wrong way round. 159.
Thank you.
About 3 weeks further on, a further decision recorded by Captain Wright in respect of data recovery. Recovery of ITS-1 data remains an outstanding issue. Previous arrangements and agreements have failed its result in its recovery. I have reiterated my desire and rationale to recover the entire system once it becomes redundant.
I apologise.
Tab 158, I did correct myself. Have I?
158. I'm sorry, I was reading 159. I apologise.
I did say one. I thought I changed it to 158, but I may have only thought that.
No. So
always a good start.
Good. I'm now at 158. Apologies.
So 158. I'll try again. It's my fault. As I said, Mr. Pughsley, at the outset, I would inevitably ask a question that made no sense and take you to the wrong document, and I've done both in one question, and we're only half an hour into the morning. Trying again. So 158, the decision on the 8th of September, some 3 weeks after the last one that we looked at. Recovery of ITS-1 data remains an outstanding issue. Previous arrangements and agreements have failed, it must be, in its recovery, or failed to result in its recovery. I've reiterated my desire and rationale to recover the entire system once it becomes redundant. And just thinking about that for a moment, the direction that Gold had given 3 weeks before was to recover the data set amicably. Here, the SIO has identified that it is still an outstanding issue and that previous arrangements and agreements haven't worked.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
Does there appear to be a sense on the part of Captain Wright that an amicable approach to recovery of the data isn't proving very effective?
Yes, in that there are regular and consistent decision logs, policy files of this nature through Captain Wright's whole tenure as the SIO. So it's obviously not getting resolved amicably.
Is this the sort of issue that you would have wanted to see escalated again so that the PMA is involved in the problems and able to offer strategic advice if he can?
Absolutely yes, Chair.
in terms of the possible significance that is recorded, we can see in the reasoning the requirement to recover ITS1 remains unchanged and the rationale has been previously documented. And then the last two sentences, we have prerogative powers under Section 95 of the Armed Forces Act and can lawfully secure and preserve it. Once redundant, there appears to be little justification in DSF refusing to assist. So is there a sense there that Captain Wright is not only expressing frustration, but also identifying that there are other means by which this data could be seized if he were permitted to do so?
That is correct, Chair. That is my understanding of this decision log.
And based on what you have read from the documents provided to you, are you able to understand why the amicable approach was still being used in September 2016 when it doesn't appear to have been effective thus far?
No, I can't. I can't and haven't read any rationale for the continuing approach, which is some 2.5 years getting on for after the investigation started, whilst the data is still outstanding.
It may well be there are very specific reasons as to the contents of that server which made it difficult to recover, but leaving those aside, if you had been the SIO, the Gold Commander or the Chief Constable in charge of this investigation, would you have regarded the recovery of the arguably independent data as an important line of inquiry?
It would have been one of the highest priority actions from 2014 onwards, and I think, to be fair to Captain Wright, he does that in his early decision logs. So the acquisition of it, or the lack of still, is surprising and very frustrating, I'm sure, for the investigators.
We will come to look at it in a moment, but one of the recommendations made by the IRT when they did their review in a few months' time was to continue with an amicable approach in regards to the seizure of the data.
Yes.
Are you able to understand why, if an amicable approach has not worked for months and months and months, that would still be being deployed as late 2016, early 2017?
I can only assume, by making that decision, or if they had a full briefing, which they did, the IRT, I can only assume that the PMA at that time, change of person, maybe felt that was the best course of action and that he could unlock whatever the barriers were. It was a change in personnel. Maybe I wasn't in those conversations, but there must be something there for that course of action to continue.
And again, does that remind us, as you'd said at the outset, the caution that we need to apply to any of your provisional conclusions, that when evidence is provided by the individuals involved, either in statement form or in live evidence before the inquiry, their explanations for what happened will be significant in how you finalise your conclusions in due course?
That's correct, Chair, yes.
Picking up on the theme of Captain Wright raising concerns, as you've rightly reminded us he did from the outset, could we just look to tab 159, please? Three weeks later, on the 28th of September, he recorded the following: data migration process has begun of the ITS-1 system. I remain of the view that we need to secure and preserve this relevant evidence. And then his reason: risk of not recovering ITS-1 risks losing vital evidence. Not to do so could pose doubt in the independent, prompt and effective investigation. There seem, if I might suggest, to be two concerns raised in the reasoning by Captain Wright. First and foremost, that if you don't get ITS-1, you might lose vital evidence. But second, if you don't get ITS-1, it might cast a shadow over the entire investigation itself.
Absolutely right. I agree, yes.
And more than agreeing with me, do you agree with Captain Wright that to flag those two issues within his reasoning was important at this stage?
I do, believe it was very important, Chair, yes.
Since we are in September of 2016, and just to confirm something you'd said earlier in your evidence this morning, as to the appointment of Lieutenant Colonel Harvey taking over as Gold from Colonel McAllister, could we just look to tab 131? And it may be that this is relevant to any observations you've made thus far about handovers and briefings. So a week or so before the ITS1 entry we just looked at, our tab 131 dated the 16th of September of 2016, notified by PMA that due to the recent departure of Colonel McAllister, which had been premature, Colonel Harvey will assume the role of Gold for Op Northmoor. Planned assumption, week commencing the 26th of September. So 10 days from the entry of this policy file report. Reason, Gold is key in the command chain, and due to the unexpected and premature departure of Lieutenant Colonel McAllister, Lieutenant Colonel Harvey will take over the appointment. Worthy of note that Lieutenant Colonel Harvey will not require a handover from the previous incumbent. Now, it may well be that due to the then ill health of Colonel McAllister, a handover in a physical face-to-face sense was impossible. But would you have expected there to be some sort of briefing note nonetheless provided to the incoming Gold commander, if not from the previous holder of the post, at least from the SIO?
Yes, I would, with supportive documentation.
And from the documents provided to you by the MOD, have you found such a handover or briefing note?
I have not, no.
Again, it may well be that Captain Wright, drawing on previous briefings that he had provided to independent advisors, was able to turn to that and to give a full briefing to the incoming Gold commander. But there doesn't appear from what you've seen to be a note of that.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
I mean, leaving aside whether that is best practice, would it just be basic practice?
Yes, in my view, it would be basic practice.
As far as other steps taken in September to try to advance the investigation, do we now know that in that month Sir John Murphy and Mark Ellison, King's Counsel, were appointed as strategic advisors? And if it helps, you've identified that in your report at paragraph, I do apologise, I thought 180. So our page 39, paragraph 180.
Thank you.
If we look, please, together with a policy file decision in respect of that appointment, we'll find it the next tab in our file. It's tab 132, please. A decision in respect to strategic advisors which identifies that the PMA, together with Colonel Morris, Sir John Murphy and Mark Ellison, attended the location in Cornwall, directed by PMA to brief both civilians on the full gravity of both Op Northmoor and Team 1 activity. It would appear that both are going to be strategic advisors to PMA and the MOD. Both are DV cleared. And then the reason. It is a matter for PMA to determine the level of external support and the nature of any advisor he chooses to bring onto Op Northmoor. Although unclear in relation to any terms of reference and precise role they may have, it is anticipated that they will advise at the strategic level direct to PMA. You told us previously that it was, of course, appropriate for the PMA to seek external assistance. There was, of course, already in place 2 lines of external support available to Op Northmoor. First in the form of the NCA, who were mentoring Captain Wright, the SIO, and second from Greater Manchester Police and the MERT team, who had been providing reviews to assist with the direction of the investigation.
Yes.
The PMA, for reasons known to him, has chosen to seek the assistance of a combined police and legal two-man advisory group. When external advisors are brought in, particularly to advise at a high strategic level, is there a need for terms of reference to be drafted so that everyone knows what they should and should not be doing?
There's certainly a need for clarity on role and responsibility of any advisor, and the best way of doing that is a terms of reference that all can see. So I know one of these pretty well from working, you know, the experienced people. So I can see why these type of people would be asked for in this very complicated position, but you need absolute clarity of who's doing what in this position.
I mean, if Captain Wright is correct in his understanding for their appointment, it's anticipated they will advise at the strategic level direct to PMA. So they are not, as understood by Captain Wright at this stage, to descend into the granular detail.
That is absolutely correct according to this decision log, yes.
It may well be that Captain Wright has misunderstood their role because there are no terms of reference, or because it hasn't been properly explained to him, or because he didn't follow the explanation if one was given. Okay?
That is correct, I agree.
But if you have an SIO who is unclear about the involvement of external advisors, would you expect that SIO to speak either to Gold or to the PMA to say, it was a pleasure to meet both gentlemen. Of course, they're experts in their field, but can I understand what role they play in the investigation so I know if I can ask for help or not?
That would make complete sense. Captain Wright has been asked to brief them. So I would expect PMA to go to the SIO to be very clear, and indeed the wider team, unless there is some strange sensitive reason that I'm not privy to. I would expect them to be fully aware of what the role of the strategic advisors were.
I mean, in terms of trying to understand the rationale behind their appointment, might one need to either look to decisions recorded by the PMA or indeed ask him in due course as to why he did what he did?
I agree.
In terms of the PMA, Brigadier Neil's recording of decisions, we know, of course, that Captain Wright is an assiduous note-taker, and there are lengthy and detailed entries into his policy file recording what he wants to do, what he hopes to achieve, the steps that should be taken. Is there a similar policy file in existence that was kept by Brigadier Neil when he was the PMA?
Not that I have found or seen, and indeed one of Captain Wright's policy files records the fact that the PMA keeps any decisions he makes on separate A4 pieces of paper.
If we look to Divider 179, the policy file decision you've just mentioned can be found there. So an entry for the 10th of August, and the decision relates to PMA policy. Brigadier Neil has elected to write policy in relation to Op Northmoor. This has not been done in the method of a policy book, but rather on A4 paper. Within his initial policy note, he's made some very sensitive remarks about senior members of the RMP, which could be damaging towards individuals' careers. And then, as to the reason, whilst PMA will continue writing policy, certain entries will need to be protected due to sensitive content. By adequately ensuring security and the appropriate distribution, this will provide for better command and direction. Now, leaving aside the sensitive remarks that may or may not have been made on these A4 pieces of paper, for the PMA to be writing policy decisions on loose sheets of paper, is that even close to best practice?
No, it's not. It's nowhere near, I'm afraid, best practice. It's very poor practice. The murder manual is very clear on the murder manual, but any police manual will tell you how important timely, accurate, independent and reliable record of notes are required on investigations, and separate pieces of A4 paper is poor practice, in my view.
The obvious danger with separate sheets of A4 paper is no matter how well you look after them, one or more might go missing.
I think there is no integrity to A4 bits of paper out of wherever they come from with regard to when that decision was written or made, other than the account of the person making it. That's why they are in decision logs, policy files, papers named, numbered, all the way through.
And reminding ourselves of some of what you said yesterday about the importance of policy files or decision logs, not only do they record what was done and why it was done, so that anyone in due course can understand decisions that were taken.
Yes.
Does it also offer a measure of protection for the author of that particular log or book?
They're designed through many years of serious investigation, both from the investigating side, defence side, court side, legal side. So not only the structure of it leads you to record a decision and your rationale, which is it's there for you to not forget to do it. And I think for anybody recording it, that the nature of the log leads you down best practice for any subsequent examination of those documents.
If we leave Brigadier Neal's loose pieces of paper for a moment, can we just go back to consider some of the external advice that he sought? Because you'd identified that in his decision to appoint external advisors, that was in keeping with best practice.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
In terms of whether it was appropriate to have a full review of where Northmoor had got to, would the incoming Chief Constable normally invite external advisors or assurers to carry out a review to date so that that individual, he or she, can understand what's happened, why it's happened, and what might need to be done?
I think the answer is yes, and probably yes, in that depending what and how comfortable the PMA felt from his gold briefing, SIO briefing. We talked about yesterday, this is 2 years or thereabouts into the investigation, and progress has been very slow in outcome. So I can see why an incoming PMA would want a full review. There are very few statements taken. There's very little, if any, covert activity. Evidence has not been acquired, and we know there's barriers to it. Staffing hasn't been achieved. I think I can see why I may ask for a full review of it.
In terms of the full review that was sought, rather than from the IAG, the Independent Advisory Group, did Brigadier Neal invite an independent review team from Merseyside Police to conduct a review of Op Northmoor?
That is correct, Chair, yes.
We know that when he arrived in post, Brigadier Neal, if he had wanted to make use of it, there was assistance from the NCA, Detective Chief Superintendent, who have been mentoring the SIO, Captain Wright.
Yes.
And there was also a MERT team from Greater Manchester Police who had thus far provided advice and guidance.
Yes, that's correct.
Would it be prudent to go to an entirely different set of advisors to review what had happened, or would it be better to use one of the other existing sources?
I can see benefit in both. I think the PMA coming in would want to understand from those who have been engaged from the beginning their view of what is happening and what the challenges were going forward. But I would expect the incoming Merseyside IRT to have covered that as part of their review. They must have, if they didn't, they should have spoken to NCA advisor. They should have looked at carefully the two reports from the initial review. Gold and the SIO, and pretty much they could have been able to form an opinion, in my view, from those 4 key people or groups of people.
In terms of the decision to go to Merseyside and to pick 2 individuals from there, is there any document that you found, be it a loose piece of A4 paper or something else, that records the decision that was taken and why it was taken by Brigadier Neil?
I've not seen why Merseyside was selected, no.
It may well be that he received a recommendation that they were best placed to assist. It may well be he had previous contacts with that particular Home Office force. But again, in terms of understanding his rationale, well, we have to wait and see what, if anything, he might have to say about it.
From the documents I've seen, I would have to agree with that. I can hazard a guess, but it would be a guess.
Well, I'm not going to invite you to guess if you don't mind. As to that review that was conducted, was it in fact conducted in January of 2017?
That is correct, Chase. Yes, it was.
6 months or so after the arrival of the new PMA, the review that he had wanted of the progress of Op Northmoor to date is then done.
That is correct, yes.
Now, again, have you seen a document that explains why there was a delay of 6 months between his arrival and a separate review done of the entire investigation thus far?
I've not seen such a document, no.
There may be many or various good reasons as to why there is a 6-month delay, but can I ask you this? If you were the incoming chief constable or even the new gold commander, would you have wanted to see a review done quicker than the 6 months it took for Merseyside to be instructed and then to report?
I absolutely would. You go back to the reason the PMA, I guess, would be able to answer for himself why he wanted the review. It must have been significant. You would have wanted early, timely answers, not, in my view, 6 months later. So I would have expected a review team coming in to help something that has already been reviewed and had external support. This depending on the availability of the reviewers, I think you're talking a couple of months, not 6 months.
Before the 6-month gap is laid at the door of Merseyside, it's right to observe that they were first invited to go down to meet with people from Op Northmoor in early January of 2017.
That is correct,
So
yes.
there may have been some time in making those arrangements and securing their attendance, but it would seem that there is at least a period of months, more than just 2, during which the external advisors don't appear to have been appointed.
That's absolutely right.
And just thinking back to what you told us this morning, if the PMA is to hit the ground running on all matters that he has strategic control over, including Operation Northmoor,
Yes.
and if he is to have the benefit of handovers or briefings from the SIO and from Gold, if that's possible, we've got a 6-month window now in which he has had strategic command of not only Operation Northmoor but the RMP. In terms of what was done in those 6 months, have you been able to identify from the material provided to you any lines of investigation that were pursued and closed off?
No, I haven't. This is a frustrating 6-month period. The lines of inquiry are still open and the overt investigation is still continuing. So therefore, if you take a step back for a moment, the ongoing acquisition of data is still live, but nothing happens in those 6 months. So some of the actions are still there, some of the policy decisions are still there, but are they turning themselves into tangible outcome? No, they're not.
Does that surprise you?
Yes, it feels a bit like the investigation's just paused. And I can understand the pause around the covert element. People want to make a decision. I can understand that. 6 months, I think, is still too long, but anyway, I can understand the pause. I don't understand any pause around any of the overt activity that is already in trend, already in place.
Given the main lines of inquiry that have been identified by the SIO on various occasions, with the arrival of a new PMA, would you have wanted to see an injection of enthusiasm into the progress of the investigation?
Yes, I would. That sort of comes a bit later for some reason, but I would expect pace, direction to have picked up with significant new appointments.
So in terms of the lack of pace and direction that you commented on before the arrival of Brigadier Neil, does that appear to continue at least for the first part of his appointment as PMA?
Yes, it does, and complemented by, I guess, next to no goal groups again for a significant period of Brigadier Neil's first 2 years in role.
I mean, as to in this 6-month period, potential delays to the investigation, might that be because the current goal commander had been unwell, was replaced with a new goal commander in September, and therefore the progress of implementing the investigative strategy was hampered by those positions?
That may be part of the reason, but I think some of the reason is articulated strongly by Captain Wright. Some of the non-activities he's directed not to do things.
Can we look, please, at the product of the IRT's review, which was done between the 3rd and then the 13th of January? We can find the report set out in our current file 3 behind tab 142. If we look behind tab 142, page 4, the introduction identifies that on the 3rd of January of 2017, 2 officers from Merseyside, Mr Jones and Mr Evans, travelled to Newquay and commenced the review of sensitive issues appertaining to Operation Northmoor. Their terms of reference are set out at our paragraph 1.4. I'm not going to go into those, but can we just record that if we look to our page 142.5, on the 5th of January, the SIO gave them a presentation on the main lines of inquiry, and that was done in the presence of the new goal commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harvey.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
Can we consider, rather than the presentation, the IRT's response to the presentation? If we look to page 6 in this particular tab, we'll see under paragraph 4 the heading IRT Initial Response to SIO's Presentation. The absence of a detailed complaint and associated witness statements and an over-reliance on the lead A claim has given rise to considerable doubt in the minds of the IRT that this incident cannot be confidently categorised as a crime at the current time. Then to paragraph 4.2. At this time, it's readily apparent there is no evidence in relation to any individual who took part in the raid of Operation Tyburn, or indeed any other alleged connected incidents. Lengthy discussion took place in an effort to identify any actionable intelligence. This scrutiny appropriately categorised the available information as judgments or statistics, third-party disclosure, speculation, rumour and chit-chat at various levels. This information is untested, untried and without provenance. It remains at this current time of a poor quality and cannot support the contention that criminal offences have taken place. The IRT strongly assert that any proposed RIPA considerations are not considered viable at this time. Until we are sure what specific roles each member of SF performed at the scene, the IRT take the view that any suspect designation is incorrect, and indeed they regard it as the next line as premature, without foundation, and at this current time profoundly unhelpful. lengthy engagement has taken place with the SIO in an effort to resolve this significant issue. At present, the SIO is open to reviewing this decision at an appropriate time. So if we just pause for a moment and to consider that initial response to the presentation by Captain Wright given on the 5th of January, the IRT team appear to have concluded that there is no evidence identified in the presentation that can confidently allow them to conclude that a crime has been committed. They also have questioned the reliability of the intelligence that they have been briefed about.
That's correct, yes.
And given those two conclusions that they've reached, they question the appropriateness, one, that anyone should be designated as a suspect, or two, that any covert activity is appropriate, because they question whether you could make such an application.
That is their finding, I agree, yes.
So at this stage, in January of 2017, the expert external reviewers appear to have marked the work of Operation Northmoor thus far and found it deficient both in terms of evidence and intelligence.
That is correct, yes.
If we just look on to their initial response, if we turn for a moment, please, to the bottom of our page 6 and to paragraph 4.7, the IRT considered that there would be merit in obtaining an individual duty statement or report from each participant in Operation Tyburn who is still in service. That's, of course, a comment similar to one that you have made previously. We'd identified the late provision of the personnel records that had only reached the RMP in March of 2016. But now in January of 2017, the external advisors are suggesting there be merit in speaking to anyone involved in the DDO for Objective Tyburn to get an account from them. Are you surprised that it takes external advisors to recommend that those in charge of the investigation into that DDO have to speak to the people that took part in the DDO?
I'm only the only reason they write that, of course, is because they've made their decision that suspect status is inappropriate. Because Captain Wright declared at least 2 people as suspect status, he was continuing down his route of a covert strategy. Part of his covert strategy included not interviewing, I guess, those people who, of course, were either there at the time or indeed were suspects, because he couldn't. So I think the IRT are able to strongly say those people should be interviewed in this way because they make the first decision about non-suspect status. Is why I believe they've come to that rationale.
And we will consider in a moment as to whether or not you regard the conclusions of the IRT team as well-founded. But can we just look on, please, as to what is required in the immediate future or long term? So proposals as to what the investigation might do. It's our page 7 in tab 142, paragraph 5.1 and 2. The IRT support the main lines of inquiry and their continuance. A more detailed analysis of what took place at the scene is essential and will determine whether a criminal offence has taken place or not. Given the additional information, speculation from knowledgeable senior sources that this alleged criminal conduct was more widespread than Op Tyburn, the IRT take the view that it would be prudent to continue the work of the SIO in relation to the alleged 10 incidents. So in terms of the strategy that is being proposed, there is disapproval, it seems, to the question of a covert strategy by the IRT team.
Yes.
But what are they actually suggesting should be the strategy going forwards for Op Northmoor?
If my understanding of this is correct, they are moving from a covert strategy to a purely overt strategy and broadening the investigation to include other deliberate detention operations that have been highlighted as of concern.
And again, leaving aside any evidential conclusions or assessments they've made, just thinking about the change of what must be a change of direction that's being proposed from covert to overt and a broadening of the perspective of the investigation, given what you told us yesterday about the covert-overt question, do you consider that their conclusion as respect to overt only is appropriate?
So their conclusion of overt only is the course of action I would have taken in the first place. So yes, I agree that, I don't agree with some of their rationale, but I do agree that an overt inquiry, investigation, is an appropriate course of action.
That's not to say, reminding us of what you said yesterday, that it was inappropriate to pursue a covert approach. That, whilst not the decision you would have taken, was within the bounds of reasonable decisions available to the SIO and Op Northmoor.
That is correct, Chair, and I can see and believe and therefore take issue with regard to whether or not suspect status was appropriate and whether a crime is being investigated. Its serious crime needs to be prevented and detected for covert activity is my understanding of the covert rules. Not a crime must have been committed. There is a difference.
In which case, can we just consider for a moment your assessment of the IRT team's assessment of the evidence?
My assessment, so I think probably the best way to describe it is on their recommendations, which is, if I may, on the document you were just using, 142.8, takes you to their recommendations, and I record them in my report at 212. So I agree with their recommendations, is probably the starting point of what I think about their review. The removal of the suspect status, I would never have put that on there in the first place. So it's right, I clarify that. But where I understand completely where they talk about lack of evidence, lack of intelligence. I don't agree entirely with the lack of intelligence. So in support of the COVID continuation and or suspect status that Captain Wright and others supporting him had decided, the fine balance would include Captain Wright, the SIO, Gold Commander, PMA previously, NCA and the IRT have agreed it's a Category A murder investigation. I think that's important. They have decided, therefore, it's been investigated as a crime, murder investigation. Whilst there is not a witness statement at this time from anybody that Lead represent, I think the indication at this time is they are prepared to make a witness statement to the MOD through solicitors, and that must have, I believe, some credibility. We have Compartment A, the document, and you have a witness statement from 1466 and all of the concerns that are highlighted in there. So some of that is evidence. It might not be direct evidence to the incident, but it is evidence of concern about the incidents. So whether you take that as witness evidence or intelligence, I think there could be a case that justifies what Captain Wright did. Where I agree, of course, then with the independent review from Merseyside is there isn't a witness statement given direct evidence. That doesn't exist at this time. So there isn't any direct evidence to say, and therefore there is a possibility still that what we do know happened, people were shot and killed, but it could have been lawful activity. And that's that balance that I talk about. So I agree their recommendations. I agree the covert course of action. I don't quite agree that there was no crime being investigated.
In terms of trying to understand what it was that had happened during the course of the 3 DDOs that have been the focus of Op Northmoor to date,
Yes.
would it be prudent for the investigation to speak to those individuals from UKSF who had been on those 3 DDOs?
Absolutely right. Back to the 2014 decision. If the 2014 decision had been to do what the IRT say, then one of the high priority actions, as well as everything we talked about data earlier, would be identify and see and speak to those on these operations, in my view.
As suggested by the IRT, take an individual statement from each participant.
Yes, and I think they call them duty statements to start with, which is, I understand that. This, you were deployed, what happened?
Because a more detailed analysis of what took place at the scene is essential and will determine whether a criminal offence has taken place or not.
And that's the bit that I talked about yesterday, the escalating scale of significant witness to suspect. So if during any of those interviews, information, evidence came to the investigators that caused them to think a criminal offence is more likely now by these people, then their status changes and all the legal protection should have been put in place, or could have been put in place, rather.
Can I ask, Mr. Pughsley, what did you think of the IRT's recommendation to broaden the inquiry to 11 DDOs?
I think that was a strong and sensible recommendation. Chairs, I talk later through my report around linked theories, and I believe that I'm sure we will get into in due course. I believe there's enough information and or evidence to look at more than just the one operation.
Before we come to consider, as we will in a moment, the response by Operation Northmoor to the recommendations set out that we've just looked at, can I just ask you this? If we've understood the position correctly, we have the MERT team from Greater Manchester Police.
Yes.
We have the NCA through Detective Chief Superintendent Williamson. We have the Independent Advisory Group with Sir John Murphy and Mark Ellison KC. And we now have the IRT team from Merseyside with the 2 officers from there. So we've got 4 separate teams or groups offering investigative and strategic advice at various levels to the investigators, the SIO, the Gold Commander and the PMA. Is there a danger that this pool of advisors gets a little cluttered when there are so many people in it?
Yeah, there must be, Chair. I've recorded it. I think my best description is of congested playing field. Absolute clarity is needed by whether it's the PMA Gold, SIO and or staff about who is directing and what are the roles or what are the responsibilities. You could easily get conflicting advice, as I just highlighted from the discussion we've had from 2 independent review teams.
And does there need to be greater clarity as to the individuals that are being advised, to whether the advice goes at a strategic level to the PMA, at a high investigative strategy level to the Gold Commander, or at a granular investigative detail to the SIO? Yes,
I absolutely agree with that. Wherever that advice is going and who would act on it, you can see again the risk of independent advice going to an SIO that Gold's not aware of and doesn't agree with. It's a possibly a risky field, but certainly a congested field.
And in the absence of clear understanding of terms of reference or lines where it's appropriate not to cross, is there a danger that those individuals step beyond the mere giving of advice and start to direct what should take place in the course of an investigation?
There is a danger to that without very strong leadership from those who have that responsibility.
So the risk that in proposing courses of action to be considered, they're accepted straight away without any thought about them or debate about whether they're appropriate.
That is a risk, yes.
And perhaps after the break for this morning, will we come to consider whether in fact that is what happened in response to both the IRT and the IAJ advice?
Yes.
So I was reminded by the time, would that be a convenient moment for this morning's mid-morning break?
It would indeed. 11:30. 25 to 12.
25 to 12. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Sorry to keep you, Mr. Glasgow.
No, not at all, thank you. Please, you, sir. Mr. Pughsley, we've been looking at the IRT report from January of 2017.
All right.
Thank you very much for the time, sir.
Not at all.
Mr. Pughsley, we were dealing with the IRT recommendations, and I'd been asking you about what you might have done had you been in the position of the Chief Constable PMA on receiving external advice, and how you might have approached the discussion about that advice with your team and the implementation of the recommendations. What I was about to ask you, please, was about Captain Wright's understanding of the IRT team recommendations. Could we look, with your help, please, in our file to tab 181? That was the document that we had on the screen just a moment ago. Dated the 23rd of February. Gold meeting. Attended Gold meeting, which was minuted. PMA detailed that he would accept all recommendations made by the IRT in respect of Team 1 business. No detailed direction provided other than those recommendations by the IRT would be compiled with in their entirety. It's probably perhaps would be complied with in their entirety. Gold will follow up with detailed direction. So it would seem that there was, following receipt of the report that we've looked at and the various recommendations that we considered with your help, that a Gold meeting took place at which either the PMA was present and set out what was to happen or had explained what was to happen, but that it was that he, PMA, would accept all recommendations made by the IRT in respect of Team 1. If we look to the reason, Captain Wright sets out, I provided a brief to all present on a Team 1 update. No debate was had regarding the acceptance of the IRT recommendations. Does that surprise you that Captain Wright has recorded in his note in support of this Gold meeting that in the first instance the PMA has accepted all the recommendations and that there'll be no detailed direction other than those to be pursued, but also that Captain Wright's recorded there's no debate about this?
Yes, Chair, is the answer to both. I would expect Gold follow up with detailed direction. That's probably what I was talking about when you asked me the question. If I was the Chief Constable, I would expect Gold to turn this into strategy now and provide that detailed direction to the SIO. But the no debate bit, yes, that is completely unusual. This is so significant, isn't it? The suspect status is removed and the main strategy is changed on its head. So to have no conversation or debate about that at SIO and above level, I think is unusual.
I mean, in effect, if the PMA has accepted the IRT recommendations, it's not simply a change in focus, it's almost a shift in direction for the investigative strategy.
Yeah, absolutely right. So the overt focus is then, the major change is now go and get interview witness accounts from the soldiers deployed, by way of example. That hasn't happened thus far because of the strategy that was in place thus far.
By heeding the advice of experts in the field, in a sense, is the PMA creating that hybrid model that you touched on yesterday, where you've got a combination of military and civilian investigators in one team to balance out the necessary military experience and expertise with the perhaps superior civilian investigative experience and expertise?
I suppose that's certainly one way to describe it. I haven't seen the decision log at all that describes what you have just described there, Mr. Glasgow. Another way of interpreting it is these are just a different set of advisors to what were there previously from Manchester, by way of example.
I mean, is there a danger with a PMA accepting everything without apparent debate with the SIO, that the SIO might resent the fact that he's been told he's got to change course?
Absolutely, and I think we see that demonstrated through Captain Wright's decision logs that take place shortly after this decision.
Can I ask, do we know whether MERT, the Manchester advisors, bought into the covert strategy?
I believe they supported it because I haven't found any documentation to say that they believe it was the wrong course of action to take.
They would have known about it, presumably.
They would have known about it through their review.
Thank you.
Picking up on the comment you just made about the decision logs from Captain Wright and whether we need to look at any of those entries following the provision of the IRT advice and the acceptance of the recommendations by the PMA, if we look to an entry, it's our tab 167, but it's in fact 5 days after the one we've just looked at. So tab 167, please.
Thank you.
Again, the issue of data recovery is being raised by Captain Wright, the SIO. We know that the IRT recommendation is that amicable approaches should be made in order to secure the recovery of ITS-1. But do we see here that he, Captain Wright, on the second line, reminded Gold that ITS-1 as a whole was required, as DSF have already explained they cannot separate the Afghanistan data required from other operational locations. A strategic decision is required about the full recovery of ITS-1. I have indicated on repeated occasions my decision at the tactical level with rationale as to why we need full recovery. And then in his reasoning, Gold will account for his involvement. I've provided Gold and others with a strategic decision-making process, my decisions and rationale. It will be for them to decide what to do in respect of ITS-1. PMA has accepted the IRT recommendations in which they advised their relevant data must be recovered as a priority. The only mechanism to do this is through full recovery of the ITS-1 system. Leaving aside perhaps the nature of the decision being recorded, but if we look at the reasoning that is recorded for it, Gold will account for his involvement. I've provided Gold and others with strategic decision-making process and my decisions and rationale. It will be for them to decide what to do in respect of ITS-1. In any way is Captain Wright identifying that he might not agree with the approach that is being taken to ITS-1?
I think he is certainly articulating his consistent desire to acquire that hugely important, probably or possibly, information.
There was a slightly earlier entry which I should have taken you to first, and I apologise for it. It's our tab 180. It was about a month before, but after the provision of the information from the IRT. So tab 180. The decision in respect of Gold Direction for the 25th of January. I am to take no action in the recovery of ITS-1 unless directed otherwise. I'm to take no action in respect of DSF deleting potential evidence, nor am I to pursue lines of inquiry in pursuance of an offence of perverting the course of public justice. I'm to take no action in respect of engagement with either suspects or witnesses. And as to the reason, no detailed rationale behind these decisions, rather explaining that actions to be paused until the PM has had sight of the IRT recommendations. I articulated the risk to the loss of evidence and the delay in progressing the investigation. In terms of directions simply to pause, is that something that you are concerned or surprised by, Mr. Pughsley?
I'm concerned and surprised by two of the bullet points. I can understand bullet point 1 because that supports the covert direction, and if no covert strategy is going to continue, I can understand that. But the other two, the evidence that we've talked about for some time now, and witnesses, are part and parcel of the recommendations, and indeed the data has been part and parcel of the major lines of inquiry from day one. So why those two are paused, I see no reason for at all.
Can we look at other similar decisions around this time which record Captain Wright's observations about decisions he has been told have been taken? Can I take you first to tab 182, please? The decision in respect of the Forensic Data Handling Centre, the FDHC, the 23rd of February. Attended meeting chaired by PMA in which FDHC was discussed. Based on the accepted recommendations by the IRT and advice provided, PMA directed that all future work on the implementation of the Forensic Data Handling Centre be stopped. Then the reason: this is the PMA's decision. For me, there remains a requirement for this system in particular to analyse in a forensic manner the data I intend to recover from ITS1 and other data repositories. I have articulated the requirement in detail to Gold. I await his direction. Does there appear to be a possible disagreement in investigative direction between the direction by the PMA and what Captain Wright himself would like to see happen?
Yeah, there absolutely does, but I've just reminded myself of the recommendations that I've recorded at 212, and the second recommendation from this review team: remove data in support of the investigation.
Recover data.
To recover data.
That's your paragraph 212, not tab 212.
It is.
Thank you.
So therefore, that aspiration and operational requirement has never changed. So why that's paused, again, others would be able to account for that. I don't know why that would happen from reading the documentation.
Can we look at just two more entries in the policy file report around this time from Captain Wright? First, tab 184, please. So Gold direction, as it's termed, direction received from Gold via email. The following has been directed. And then it records some of the information that we'd seen in the recommendations from the IRT. For example, the two high priority items: deploy to Afghanistan to record evidence, recover data relevant to the investigation via consent. Then the obtaining of duty reports from serving personnel, continue to investigate 10 other similar incidents, declassify suspect status, discontinue covert options, and then obtain duty reports or statements from those serving in respect of the other related incidents. That, of course, we know was the information provided by the IRT in their report in early January. As to the reason behind the direction received from Gold, rationale that PMA has directed it, no other detail provided, greater clarity required as I am unclear on Gold's intent around these specific activities. When one looks at the reason that Captain Wright has set out, having received that direction from Gold via email, what observations, if any, do you have about what is set out there by Captain Wright, please?
It's pointing to a fractious relationship between Gold and the SIO, in my view. I don't know location where Gold is and where the SIO is, but we've now reverted to email direction rather than face-to-face between Gold and the SIO, which could be concerning. Others could explain it further. It's certainly, from the rationale or the reason, you can see that Gold is, that the SIO has been directed to do things without any explanation. and reading it again here today, the decision says gold direction. Well, actually it isn't. PMA is directing it. So already more confusion about what role PMA and gold are doing here. Gold's recorded it, but he hasn't directed it. The PMA has.
So in a sense, do we now have the overarching strategic advisor setting individual investigative strands which he's directing his gold commander to tell the SIO to do?
That is correct, yes.
Just pausing for a moment, is there anything improper with the Chief Constable in identifying what might be appropriate investigative strands to follow and indicating to those under his command that he wants those carried out?
Not improper, no, but it is not in line with the roles and responsibilities that this is still a murder investigation, that the murder investigation says is good practice. And I haven't again seen any documentation that says the PMA is performing the role as the gold commander. He's got a gold commander, and the gold commander seems to not quite be doing his role because the PMA is stepping into it.
I mean, if you're right in that assessment and the PMA is beginning to direct the investigation, what impact, if any, does that have on the SIO whose investigation it is?
Well, it completely disarms and dispowers the SIO. I got back to the manual. The manual says there should be an SIO, and the SIO is the lead investigator for the crime of murder. If that SIO is not allowed to try and lead the investigation to implement against the gold strategy, then he or she, again, is still Captain Wright, they've simply not been allowed to do the job of the SIO.
You picked up on the fact that the discussions as to direction appears now to be via email rather than face-to-face. It may be, of course, that individuals could not meet face-to-face because of other constraints or locations that they were in. But just picking up on that last observation you made and turning to our divider 185. Discussed with Gold the direction he has provided to me. That's, of course, the email direction that we looked at a moment or two before. I required greater detail to ensure I would deliver on his intent and provide an opportunity for me to discuss with him what we had achieved and attempted to evidence in respect to the major lines of inquiry. After a lengthy conversation, Gold informed me that he would not provide any greater detail to the written direction he had issued. I reiterated the requirement to recover ITS-1 in full. Anything less would fall short of a thorough and effective investigation. So it would seem, if that accurately records what transpired in that conversation, that Captain Wright has sought an explanation for the direction he has been given via Gold from the PMA, and one has not been provided.
That is correct, yes.
It may be that Gold does not have the rationale from PMA and therefore can't explain it, or it may be that PMA and Gold have discussed things which they don't want to share with the SIO. It'll be, of course, for others to explain in due course.
It could be all of those, or any of those.
If an SIO goes to the Gold Commander and asks for greater clarity about why he is being told to do what he is to do, would you expect that clarity to be provided?
I would expect the clarity to be provided, and I am surprised that SIO in any murder investigation has had to ask that question.
I mean, in a sense, is he being isolated from the decision-making process?
From his decision logs, and I stress any of my views are based on the documentation only, but from the decision logs I've seen and some of the supporting documentation, it's the only conclusion I can come to. He appears to me to have been alienated shortly after the change in direction following the review by the IRT.
And just sticking with our policy entry for the 8th of March, which is our tab 185, if we just look to the reason that's set out at the very bottom of that entry, Other than the above and the previous written direction, Gold will not provide further rationale to me. I imagine he will account for this himself in his own written rationale. I'm unaware if Gold maintains a policy book. I have not been privy to it. What, if anything, do you conclude from that observation by the SIO about the stance that his Gold commander has taken?
Certainly a poor working relationship currently between Gold and the SIO. The fact that the SIO doesn't know how Gold is recording or not his decisions, I'd expect the SIO to know that, mainly because if they're in a policy book, they'd end up going on to Holmes in due course, either during or at the end of the investigation. So it's fractious, I think. It feels an uncomfortable place for the SIO, and I think maybe he's recording lots of his feelings through these decision logs for anybody to see in the future, whether or not there's a concern about this investigation.
When you say that policy books go on to Holmes, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, so with the type documents that we are referring to here today come from a handwritten policy log by Captain Wright. That handwritten document, the book itself, will eventually, if not during the inquiry, certainly at the end of the inquiry, be given to the internal team, who will type it in full, as they have done here, and retain the original book as a handwritten exhibit.
Does the same obtain for A4 bits of paper?
Well, it does if the A4 bits of paper are handed to the Holmes team. So if the A4 bits of paper written by Brigadier Neil have been handed to the Holmes team, they should have been typed in full on the Holmes account.
Thank you, Mr. Mother.
Thank you, sir. You'd identified the potential pause in the investigation and a possible lack of progress that there had been in the first few months of the new PMA Brigadier Neil's tenure. As to whether there was any progress in the investigation, have you identified that there was progress in 2017 that took the investigation forwards?
In 2017, no, not significant, no.
I mean, simply in terms of one action that was undertaken, can I just have your help, please, your paragraph in the report 237 to help you bring it to mind?
Thank you.
And if we look, please, together, this time file 4, divider 249. Do we see from our entry in 249 a policy decision from now the SIO Major Cox in respect of Team 1, a decision recording that between the 8th and the 10th of September of this year that Mr. Saifullah is to be interviewed in Afghanistan.
And that's fair, and that did take place in September 2017, to clarify my previous comment.
So we know that this was a course of action that had been identified some time ago as being a main line of inquiry.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
That there have been challenges in securing both a safe location and getting access to Mr. Saifullah.
That is correct, again, yes.
But that the interview with him eventually was to take place, as we can see, in early September of 2017.
That is correct, yes.
again, trying to identify other progress that was made, if not in 2017, certainly in very early 2018. We'd seen from the IRT recommendations that one of the recommendations was to continue with the expanded focus of Operation Northmoor and to look beyond objectives 1, 2 and Tyburn, and to look at the others that had been identified by N1466 back in early 2011. If we, please staying in divider number 4, if we look back for a moment to tab 218.
Thank you.
We see an entry from Major Cox in the policy file report for the 12th of January of 2018. The scoping of the 10 similar events will continue with prioritisation given to objectives 2 and 1 in order to recover sync reps, OPSUMs, OSW, relevant SIRs and any other material able to contextualise each event. On completion, a risk assessment will be considered before full investigative status is afforded. The reason for that is recorded as the IRT report from November 17, so the second report that they had provided, accepted by the PMA, lays down the recommendation with regards to the continued scoping of material for 10 other incidents identified in the TTP review. We just pause for a moment. This is January of 2018.
Yes.
We know that from January 2017, the first review of the IRT team, the 2 retired police officers from Merseyside, had directed as a proposed investigative strategy that the continued expansion is to take place. But we can see that almost exactly a year later, what is happening is a scoping of 10 similar events in order to assess them before they are given full investigative status.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
Does it surprise you that if there had been an expanded focus identified by the IRT team as appropriate in January 2017, that a year later we're still at the scoping stage rather than the investigative stage?
Yes, it does. And I think, as I said earlier, change of staff 16, review end of 16 into 17, but the pace really picks up towards the end of 17 into 18. So there's still a lethargy, if that's the right word from me, with regard to how quickly the investigation is progressing at this time. 18 onwards, or late 17 onwards, it moves at a better pace.
Now, we've looked at the IRT and their assistance, but we know, of course, that there was a second set of advisors that had been brought in by Brigadier Neil, which was the Independent Advisory Group, so the IRG comprised of Sir John Murphy and Mark Ellison, King's Counsel. In terms of their role, have you been able better to understand what actual role they were to perform in assisting Operation Northmoor?
So I think at the early part of their role, it appears that they provide direction that leads to the IRT coming in and giving their review. There is a number of goal groups that show that both Mr. Murphy and Mr. Ellison are present at goal groups, particularly in 2019, because there are very few in 17 and 18. And there are decision logs recorded by Major Cox now as the SIO, where certainly on 1 or 2 occasions, direct SIO decisions are advised by Mr. Murphy about who should be interviewed, for example, with regard to furthering the investigative element of Northmoor.
And if we've got Sir John Murphy within the IAG offering investigative direction, and if we've got the IRT team offering investigative direction, all of which appears to be accepted by the PMA, if Captain Wright is correct, without debate,
Yes.
who's actually running Operation Northmoor?
Well, according to the documentation, it is still Brigadier Neil, his gold and his SIO, because there's nothing that I've found that records such a significant change in who is the lead agency for this investigation.
I mean, you've recorded, if we just look at it in your paragraph 230, the last 3 lines of that paragraph. So our page 48, your paragraph 230. From my reading of the documents, it appears that the IRT, the independent advisors and the PMA are carrying out duties that the Murder Investigation Manual and I would expect to be performed by the SIO and the Gold Commander.
That is correct. You can see strategic decisions, as in, let's take the recommendations, they are providing the strategic direction, readily accepted without debate if the decision logs are correct. And then you get down to some tactical decisions and direction of interview A, B or C. That's an SIO's decision, in my view, all day long. And some of the ongoing work of the IRT, I think they're called assurance reports. And when you read them, one interpretation I've formed is that they are checking up on the progress of the investigation team by the investigators as a review, which I think is stepping into the territory of Gold Commander.
You'd identified that, notwithstanding if there is any blurring of the lines, that blurring, that there had been progress with the investigation, in part in 2017 and onwards.
Yes.
Are you able to identify what it was that led to that progress starting, if there had been slow progress before?
Certainly, so Major Cox records a lot of, in his decision logs, about what is happening and what is not happening. And I think in 17 into 18, therefore, the investigating team get the ability to go and speak to, in the main, anyway, the soldiers deployed on the 3 operations, the 3 deliberate detention operations. And they get accounts from pretty much all of the soldiers deployed. The decision logs are in line with, of course, the direction that was set back in 17. So it's some time later, but the action is the right action, in my view. It is the right action to go and interview the soldiers. It's the right thing to do. I suppose the outcome of those interviews is not surprising given the length of time.
And when you say interview, can I just check, is that a reference to interview as witnesses rather than suspects?
That is correct. All of them, everybody, as I can see, is interviewed as witnesses.
And is that in keeping with what you had assessed would be the correct course, that they be treated as significant witnesses and interviewed, subject, of course, to the caveat that should anything change during the course of the interview because of what they might say, their status might shift from witness to possibly an arrested individual and cautioned?
That is correct, Chair, yes.
In terms of an assessment of the progress for 2017, can we just look briefly at the November report from the IRT, comprising the 2 gentlemen, Mr. Jones and Mr. Evans? It's our tab 253, and within that it's page 7, please, under the summary section, and it's simply the last 3 lines of paragraph 6.2. Having been instructed to come in and conduct a further review, the IRT team note that they are impressed with the organisation and the approach adopted, and they record the following: the progress that has been achieved in the last year in almost every aspect of this inquiry has been quite outstanding. It is certainly beyond the expectations of both members of the IRT. Is that an assessment with which you agree, Mr. Pughsley?
No, I don't. I don't think any data has been recovered still at this period of time. One significant interview I accept, of course, that we've just talked about in September 17, but I think many of the soldiers deployed were interviewed in 2018 after this report.
In terms of the approach taken by the IRT, they having set a number of recommendations in January which were accepted, in measuring the success of the investigation between January and November, what are they using as a means of assessing whether the investigation has progressed or not?
Well, my understanding is that they are being briefed by whether it's Gold and or Major Cox with regard to the activity that's been achieved by the investigation teams. I think some of the documents, CEG documents, I think are some of the documents that monitor that progress, which are new to me. They're not they must be a military document. They're not a Home Office document. So the progress is monitored, evaluated and commented upon by the review team. So the investigating team are answering to the review team.
And in terms of the yardstick that's being applied, the review team having set out clear recommendations in January, are they effectively looking to see whether those recommendations have been followed?
They're marking their work, yeah. They are marking their recommendations, their homework. They're doing that's a Gold response, that's Gold's job. A Gold group, in my view, should be setting the strategic direction and then holding the SIO and the team to account for delivery against the strategic direction. Where we seem to have morphed into here, the assurance reports seem to indicate, to me anyway, that it's the IRT that are monitoring the progress of the investigation.
In terms of the Gold Group, you'd already told us before about the number and frequency of the Gold Group meetings that had taken place. You've just described the IRT as in effect fulfilling the role of the Gold Group. For 2017, how many Gold Group meetings were there?
There were no Gold Groups in 2017.
And how many in 2018?
One in 2018.
And might that be because the Gold Commander has recognised that there are a number of other organisations involved in assessing the course of the investigation, therefore it's best to leave it to the experts?
I guess that would be one explanation by Lieutenant Colonel Harvey. He would have to answer that for himself. But some of the progress that was slowish in 17 and then quickens up at pace might have happened quicker if there were regular Gold groups, back to monthly Gold groups, chaired by Gold. Gold would have to then do his job, which is show that he has the responsibility for the strategy of this investigation. In 18, there may have been quicker and better progress if you had regular Gold groups. Again, for others to be able to give more detail on that, mine is based on what I've read and what I've seen. But there's nothing that I've seen that has said we're going to step outside the tried and tested murder manual process and we're going to let the investigation be led by a review team. I think, in my humble view, if they were asked to review, as I've recorded, I think they've taken a step too far. I use the word directing. They're very close to leading this investigation.
Might that be because they perceive that they have greater experience and knowledge in this area and therefore they are attempting to assist the investigation as best as they possibly can?
I'm sure the rationale for it was with the best intentions to try and get to the truth of what happened in 2011. But it is not their responsibility, unless there's a decision that I've not seen, that negates the very first decision that says the RMP and the independent investigators, the investigators into Operation Northmore. Unless something's changed, then Brigadier Neil, Lieutenant Colonel Harvey, and Major Cox as the SIO retain the responsibility for the investigation as per national best practice. Take whatever advice you want, and it's sensible advice in my view, it's the right advice in my view, it's the right lines of inquiry. But I've seen many gold groups that do what the assurance reports reviews do. That's what the minutes should look like of a good gold group when you hold into account the progress by the SIO.
As far as Lieutenant Colonel Harvey's responsibilities as the Gold Commander, has he fulfilled what you would expect of him as a Gold Commander? I
think he's no, because just start with the gold groups. No gold groups and one gold group over a 24-month period. I think he's just passing information from A to B to get done. That's what I think he's doing as a Gold Commander.
And before any criticism is levelled just at Lieutenant Colonel Harvey as the Gold Commander, in any way do either the PMA looking up or the SIO looking down share any responsibility for the failure to hold gold groups if that's in fact what happened?
What Major Cox, I think, is doing is getting the job done. I can see what he's recording the policy logs. He's not necessarily the lead investigator, as an SIO should be, but he's doing his very best, I think, in 18 and 19 anyway, to deliver the outstanding actions and lines of inquiry. The PMA, in my view, seems to have accepted readily the IRT recommendations, as we can see through the documentation, without debate, and he's allowing the IRT and their recommendations to run the investigation through Gold. Gold simply seems to be saying, here's the recent instruction from the IRT, now we're going to do it.
In terms of ongoing assistance from the IRT, did they conduct what was described as an assurance visit in August of 2018?
Yes, they did.
Can we look, please, in our divider 199, page 6, and just paragraph 3.2, please?
Excuse me, that's a different bundle, isn't it?
I'm so sorry, bundle 3, paragraph 199, tab 199, page 6.
Apologies, I'm with you.
Thank you. The IRT team have identified that they are impressed with the positive ongoing approach of the SIO and his investigation team, and then they record, it has been agreed between Gold and the IRT that a further assurance visit should take place if a positive outcome is achieved in regards to the proposed activity into Operations 2 and 1. Conversely, if no substantial progress has been made, the IRT should return with a view to developing an exit strategy. Could you help us, please, with what might be in mind when the review team talk in August 2018 about an exit strategy as an option on their next visit?
In all of my experience of any lengthy, complex investigation, or indeed those that are a bit shorter, when you start considering and talking about exit strategy, you are coming towards the end of your investigation.
I mean, the advice that's being offered here is, in effect, wait and see what progress can be made in respect of 1 and 2. If there is progress, that will be a positive thing. If there isn't progress, and it's substantial progress, then possible closure of the inquiry is an option that might be considered.
That is my interpretation of what is recorded here.
I mean, in August 2018, might it be premature of the independent review team to be suggesting the possibility even of an exit strategy for this investigation?
I think it is premature. What we know, or what I've certainly know from reading the documentation, there are still a number of soldiers, I believe, to be seen, and there is certainly a large number of Afghanistani individuals that haven't been seen at this time that could provide eyewitness accounts to any of these three operations.
Can I ask, is the term exit strategy normal terminology?
It is in a investigation of this, a murder inquiry. It's a normal phrase that you would close the inquiry down, finish it in the way that I'm sure, hopefully I've described through my report, and the exit strategy is you move your staff away from this investigation.
If we just look for a moment, and it's now to file 4, please. Tab 225.
Thank you.
A week after the IRT assurance document referring to a possible exit strategy is signed, we have Major Cox recording a policy file report, 9th of August. We will now expedite all lines of inquiry. This, of course, is an investigation that's now been running for some time. Is it unusual 4 years into the life of an investigation for one of the senior investigations to direct that they'll expedite the lines of inquiry?
Yes, it is unusual 4 years in. It's also unusual, even if you accept the change of direction, that this is sometime still after that.
As to the acceptance, once again, of the IRT recommendations, we see that Major Cox records, Gold has verbally informed me that on the 8th of August, PMA was briefed on the IRT report and has verbally accepted the recommendation held within. Does that appear to suggest that one of the recommendations, if it is to include a possible exit strategy, might have been accepted by the PMA in August of 2018?
That is one conclusion you can draw, yes.
It may be that in providing the information from PMA to Silver, Gold has got it confused. It may be that wasn't what was meant to be passed. And it may be that the acceptance is simply about directions for the investigation rather than what might happen on the next IRT team visit. But will all of that depend on the individuals concerned and what they may have to say about this?
It would, Chair, yes.
I mean, in terms of possible priority actions that need to be expedited at this time, if we look over to the next tab, divider number 226. Do we see that following the IRT review, an entry for the 14th of August, Major Cox has identified priority must be given to N1466, someone who's already been spoken to on a number of occasions?
That is correct, yes.
In terms of the potential significance of 1466 to the investigation, information having been provided by him back in 2015, is it odd that he's regarded now as a priority in order to be spoken to again?
It is unusual. And it's not just information. I think a witness statement has been recorded, hasn't it, from this individual? So arguably, even more important. Without knowing the rationale behind the decision, it sits unusual, but there may be, from those who've recorded this, a reason behind it that they've simply not recorded.
In terms of the ambit of Northmoor at this stage, if we look, please, to tab 231. So just under 3 months later, a further decision recorded by Major Cox. Previous policies that relate to Objective Tyburn and Objectives 2 and 1 are recorded and currently on the Northmoor incident priority, so prioritisation to those 3. And then the other remaining 8 DDOs from the TTP review are low priority and will be dealt with as such. What, if anything, might one sensibly understand from the assessment that the other 8 DDOs are low priority and will be dealt with as such?
So what that means, in my experience, is the high priority will receive the attention of the investigation team, whether it's witness statements or anything else, trying to progress the investigation. The others, not quite on the back boiler, but they are not going to receive the same attention as Objective 1, 2 and Tyburn.
So whilst there had been a broadening of the focus, it may be there's a slight narrowing of the focus from now on, with prioritisation given to 3 DDOs and less priority to the other 8.
I agree entirely with that assessment, and as I think I said and I mentioned previously, I don't believe that would have happened had the right decision been made about linking offences at an earlier or indeed at any stage.
We know from the IRT assurance document in August of 2018 that they had identified a possible need to return when an assessment would be undertaken of the progress, be it substantial or otherwise, that had been made in the major lines of inquiry. Can we just look together with your help to your paragraph 263 for a moment? Because they returned in April of 2019 to provide a further assurance report.
That is correct, Chair, yes.
That document we can find in our file 4 behind tab 276. So there's been an 8-month gap since August and now their return on the 8th of April. So tab 276. Page 3 within that, simply to identify the dates, please. Thank you very much indeed. So Mr. Jones and Mr. Evans returned and commenced, as they described, a further assurance visit. If we just look, if you wouldn't mind, please, to the last page, our page 6, section 13, entitled Conclusion. The IRT continued to be impressed with the positive, tenacious and professional ongoing approach by the SIO and his investigative team. They continue to be open and realistic about the investigation and always adopt a thorough and comprehensive approach to all arising tasks. The IRT are of the opinion that Operation Northmoor should now consider all aspects in connection with a suitable exit strategy. The IRT believe that the inquiries and extensive work carried out to date has been robust, thorough, and will be able to stand scrutiny from any third party. In terms of the opinion offered in the middle of their conclusion that all aspects should be considered as regards a suitable exit strategy. What do you understand that to mean, please, Mr. Pughsley?
I understood that to mean that all of the major outstanding lines of inquiry have been assessed, have been worked on, and have been updated to the to the review team, and that they believe that those lines of inquiry are not providing any evidence to support any arrest and/or charge or anything else that goes with this investigation, because it's coming towards a closure.
I mean, we know that the IRT have had involvement with Operation Northmoor now for some 2 years.
That's correct, yes.
And we've seen that their recommendations have been accepted by the PMA, Brigadier Neil, every time they have been offered.
That is correct, yes, Chair.
And if Captain Wright is correct, he has on occasions felt that those decisions to accept all the recommendations have not been fully justified to him.
That is correct as well, yes.
In terms of what is likely to happen when the IRT team, who have been so instrumental in the investigation for 2 years, now recommend a suitable exit strategy, what's the likely outcome?
Well, the likely outcome is a closure of the investigation. I would hope, though, if anything was, and that should be through a gold group, and it was through a gold group, but if there's anything presented at that gold group to the ultimate decision maker, which is still the PMA, if my understanding remains correct, then whether their recommendations push towards an exit strategy and a closure of the investigation, it's the PMA's decision. And if there is something in that gold meeting that indicates differently, then he should absolutely not close it and pursue those lines of inquiry.
I mean, just this before we break for lunch. As far as the opinion of the IRT that was provided in April of 2019, do you agree that the inquiries and extensive work to date has been robust, thorough, and will be able to stand scrutiny?
So not stand scrutiny for the whole of the investigation, or indeed the whole of the time that this IRT have been involved. But if they're talking about from their last report to this report, then there has been significant progress made.
But as far as that progress is concerned, had all main lines of inquiry been closed off?
From the documentation I've seen, in my view, no, they had not.
Is it appropriate to consider an exit strategy when there are main lines of inquiry outstanding?
In my view, no. You want to know that the major lines of inquiry have been exhausted and are closed down.
And are we talking about dotting I's and crossing T's here, or are we talking about exploring potentially significant evidential inquiries?
If it was the crossing I's, dotting T's, then in my view, an exit strategy conversation would be appropriate. But I believe there are 3 significant major lines of inquiry outstanding when the decision is made to close Northmoor. One of them, a significant number of potential witnesses, eyewitnesses to the deliberate detention operations haven't been seen. And it is a significant number. That's a brave decision. Without any documentation I've seen to say why those people cannot be seen. Now, if there's reasons for that, then that will come out in due course. But my reading says there's a large number of eyewitness, potential witnesses outstanding that should be seen. The second one, and we mentioned it many times over the day and a half now, recorded by the investigation team and seen by the Gold Group, there is still a line of inquiry out with regard to data held, and that may assist the independence and investigation of those operations. And the third one is a British soldier is still to be seen who was deployed on those operations. Now, he can be seen 3 or 4, I think it is, weeks after the closure, and that's only one person, but I think as a minimum I would have seen that person before I then considered again the other two outstanding lines of inquiry. That's a documentary review. With all of that outstanding, I would not have closed Operation Northmoor in 2019 when it was closed with those lines of inquiry outstanding. I simply would not have done it. Those who did it would be able to give better clarity, I guess, because some of it, I can't find a decision log that tells me why it was closed. Simply can't find it. I should be able to read that. That should be a pretty full document because of the significance of the decision.
Well, perhaps after lunch we can come to consider the documents that do exist and whether they assist you or anyone else in understanding the rationale.
Thank you, Chair.
So would that be a convenient moment?
It would. We'll have an exit strategy until 2:05, please.
Thank you, sir.
All right.